Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to a noise coming from the hallway, but you're sure you're home alone. Or receiving a message from an unknown number, with details about your life that no one should know. True stories have a terrifying power, because, as much as you want to believe they're just fiction, they happened. And today, I'm going to tell you 3 cases that will make you think twice before turning off the light. Each of these stories was meticulously investigated, with witness accounts and frightening statements. They are events that defy logic and leave a question in the air: what if it happened to you? Stay until the end, because the 3rd story, in particular, will make you question even what you think you know about the world around you. The Jamison Family Case, USA, Oklahoma. It was a cold October afternoon in 2009 when the small town of Eufaula, Oklahoma, witnessed the beginning of one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern American history. A seemingly ordinary family disappeared without a trace, under circumstances so strange that they still fuel dark theories and intense discussions among investigators and curious people. They simply vanished, as if they had been torn from reality by an invisible and evil force. Bobby Jamison, his wife Sherilyn and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, left home for a rural area in the Sans Bois Mountains. They were looking for land to buy and start a new life in the middle of nature, far from society. But the road that took them there also led them to oblivion. What happened during those hours forever changed the way many see the boundaries between the real and the inexplicable. From the moment the family's car was found abandoned, authorities knew they were not dealing with a simple disappearance. Something about the scene, silent, cold, almost theatrical, made one's skin crawl. And as the details of the case came to light, it became clear that the Jamison story was not just tragic, it was disturbing. And it all started with who they were. Bobby Dale Jamison was a man with a quiet, distant look in his eyes. He was in his early 40s and was going through a period of great change. After a car accident that left him with severe chronic pain, Bobby began to isolate himself more and more. His wife, Sherilyn Louise, was described by friends as intense, sensitive, and sometimes unpredictable. She suffered from severe depression and had a history of erratic behavior. Little Madison, the couple's only child, was the soul of the house, a lively child with the kind of energy that made any room shine. The family lived in a modest home in a relatively isolated area. They had decided to leave the city in search of peace and solitude. Bobby and Sherilyn believed that life in the country would be the solution to their emotional and spiritual problems. They often talked about starting over, about getting away from it all, and even about getting rid of the negative influences that, according to Sherilyn, haunted the family. But no one knew for sure what she meant by that, at least not yet. In the last few months before the disappearance, reports from neighbors and friends began to paint a darker picture. There were fights, sudden changes in behavior, and even references to supernatural presences inside the house. Sherilyn said she saw spirits. Bobby, in turn, kept a diary where he recorded strange and paranoid thoughts. Everything indicated that something was wrong, something about to explode. And it was in this climate of growing tension that the final trip began. On the morning of October 8, 2009, the Jamison family set off for the Sans Bois Mountains, taking with them little more than a few backpacks, a camera, their dog, and an envelope with an absurd amount of money, around $32,000 in cash. They didn't tell any relatives, neighbors, or friends. They simply got into their white pickup truck and continued on their way. The security camera installed at the entrance to the house recorded the trio's last moments, and what we see there is strange. In the images, Bobby and Sherilyn appear to be walking back and forth to the vehicle, several times, as if in a trance. Their movements are mechanical, rigid, and neither of them seems to speak to the other. It's as if they're performing a task without knowing exactly why. At certain moments, they stand still, staring into space, motionless for a few seconds, before resuming their strange routine. Nothing there seems natural. And the recording ends with the car disappearing down the road. After that, silence. No phone calls. No contact. No movement in bank accounts. When no one was reported missing from work or school, concerns first arose. But it was only days later that the truck was found abandoned on a rural trail, with no signs of violence or escape. And what was inside it only deepened the mystery, and raised suspicions that even the police didn't know where to start investigating. The family car was parked straight, as if it had been left there on purpose. Inside it, investigators found all of the Jamisons' belongings, wallets, documents, cell phones, and even the family dog, visibly dehydrated but still alive. The animal had been left locked up, without food or water for days. But what caught the most attention was the presence of the envelope with $32,000 hidden almost carelessly under the driver's seat. It didn't make sense. Why would a family in financial difficulty carry so much cash without tell anyone? And what's more, why would they leave everything behind? There were no footprints, no tire tracks off the trail. The location was remote, surrounded by tall grass and dense trees, as if it had been chosen to erase any trace. The investigation began to consider darker possibilities, including murder, escape, ritual, and even involvement with drugs or cults. Despite the intense search with sniffer dogs, drones, and rescue teams, no concrete clues were found in the area. It was as if Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison had simply disappeared into thin air. The car became a dark symbol of the case, a capsule of mysteries parked in the middle of nowhere, where everything was present, except the most important thing, the family itself. But the true horrors of this story were yet to come. Because years later, the bodies would be found. And nothing that was revealed would explain enough. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into years, the Jamison case became fertile ground for speculation. Some people believed the family had been the victims of a violent crime committed by someone they knew. Others pointed to Bobby and Sherilyn's own strange behavior, suggesting that they had orchestrated a death pact. But what really caught everyone's attention were reports that they had been dabbling in the occult, and even consulting a so-called exorcist. A longtime family friend told police that Bobby had said he was being haunted by spirits in his home, and that he saw shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the rooms. Sherilyn, in turn, had painted cryptic messages on the walls of the house, mentioning witchcraft and demons. Bobby's own mother said she believed the family had been killed by a satanic cult. With each detail, the case seemed to delve deeper into the dark side of the human psyche, and perhaps beyond. The FBI even considered drug or cartel involvement, especially because of the cash involved. But nothing was found to link the Jamisons to drug trafficking or any type of criminal activity. No suspicious movements, no compromising connections. It was as if the explanation itself had disappeared along with them. And then, almost 4 years later, something emerged from the shadows of time and brought back terror to the city of Eufaula. In November 2013, hunters exploring an isolated area less than 3 miles from where the truck had been found made a gruesome discovery: 3 human skeletons, lying side by side, in an advanced state of decomposition. The remains were almost fossilized, hidden among bushes and dry roots, as if the forest wanted to swallow that secret forever. Forensic examinations confirmed what everyone feared: they were the bodies of Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison. The forensic report brought more questions than answers. The cause of death could not be determined with precision. No visible fractures. No apparent fatal wounds. There were no signs of a bullet or a stab wound. Just clean bones, without context, and the absolute silence of a forest that seemed to proudly guard its mystery. It was as if nature itself were conspiring to ensure that the truth would never be revealed. To this day, the Jamison family case remains unsolved. Mystery, tragedy, supernatural, or calculated crime. No one knows for sure. What is known is that something deeply wrong happened on that trail. And the way everything was found, the money, the dog, the intact bodies, remains a grim reminder that not all cases have answers. Some stories simply prefer to continue haunting those who dare to tell them. What really happened to the Jamison family in that forgotten Oklahoma forest? Were they victims of something supernatural, or of something even more human and dark? The truth, perhaps, is buried with them, or lives on in the details that went unnoticed. Leave your opinion in the comments. Next story. Cecil Hotel, Elisa Lam case. On a cold February night, a young Canadian woman disappeared in one of the darkest hotels in the United States. The last image the world saw of her was in an elevator, where her strange behavior and enigmatic movements generated thousands of theories. Since then, the case has become a modern legend, an enigma that mixes terror, madness, and mystery. Her name was Elisa Lam, a seemingly ordinary student who, without warning, became the protagonist of one of the most disturbing videos on the internet. The images recorded by security cameras do not show blood, screams, or explicit violence, but what is there is so disturbing that it sends shivers down the spines of anyone who watches it. Something in that elevator was not right, and Elisa's gaze, in her last moments, seems to cry out for help. But what really happened to Elisa Lam? Was she the victim of a crime? Of an evil presence that inhabited the hotel? Or was her own mind responsible for pushing her to the limit? Get ready to dive into a story where terror doesn't come from imaginary monsters, but from a much more real fear, the fear of the unknown. Elisa Lam, or Lisa, as she was called by her closest friends, was 21 years old and lived with her parents in Vancouver, Canada. She was studying at the University of British Columbia and, despite having temporarily paused her studies, she remained very active on social media, especially on a blog where she shared deep thoughts, feelings, and even moments of fragility. She was a curious, sensitive young woman, full of dreams, and she was also fighting an invisible battle with her own mind. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder, Lisa was taking prescription medication and had already faced periods of emotional fluctuations. Her online posts revealed a vulnerable side, but also a constant attempt to find meaning in life. She wanted to explore the world, find beauty in the little things, and escape the suffocating routine she carried at home. That was exactly what motivated her to embark on a solo trip along the west coast of the United States. Her journey, however, would take a completely unexpected turn. What was supposed to be a simple stopover in Los Angeles would end up becoming the stage for her last breath. Lisa didn't know it, but the hotel she had chosen to spend a few nights hid stories as dark as those told around campfires on moonless nights. And by setting foot there, in that cursed place, she began a cycle of events that defies all logic to this day. Located in the heart of Los Angeles, the Cecil Hotel was not just another old building surrounded by urban chaos. Since its opening in 1927, it had accumulated a macabre reputation: suicides, murders, missing guests, and even the stay of notorious criminals like Richard Ramirez, the infamous Night Stalker. That concrete structure seemed to have absorbed decades of tragedy, as if it were alive, feeding on the pain and fear it harbored. When Elisa Lam checked in January 2013, she probably had no idea of the place's dark history. The hotel, which had been partially renovated and renamed Stay on Main, still shared the same elevator, the same hallways, and the same heavy atmosphere. For many locals, the building wasn't just a place with a bad reputation, it was cursed. And those who entered it sometimes didn't leave unscathed. Lisa's first few days at the hotel seemed normal. She shared a room with other girls, but reportedly was moved to a single room after her behavior began to bother her roommates. Something about her seemed off, and as the days passed, the silence of the hotel and the invisible whispers in the hallways seemed to influence her. It was as if the hotel had chosen her. On January 31, 2013, Lisa was supposed to check out and travel to Santa Cruz. But she never showed up at the front desk. The staff thought it was odd, since she seemed like a quiet guest. After a few hours, the hotel staff entered the room. The bed was unmade, her belongings were still there, but there was no sign of her. As if she had evaporated. Her parents, already worried about not being able to contact her, called the local police. The search began immediately. The police searched the entire hotel, with sniffer dogs and a specialized team, but no trace of Elisa was found. No screams, no witnesses, no broken doors. Everything seemed in order. But the police felt something strange, the kind of discomfort that cannot be explained with logic, it can only be felt. As if something or someone there was hiding the truth. Days passed without any concrete clues, until the investigators decided to analyze the security camera footage. That's when they found the video. Recorded inside the hotel elevator, it showed Elisa in her last known minutes of life. But what that recording revealed was so disturbing that it would leave the entire world in shock, and open the doors to an endless mystery. The recording is just over 2 minutes long, but it seems to last forever. In the video, Elisa Lam enters the elevator in a hurry, presses several buttons at the same time and leans against the corner, as if she were trying to hide from someone. The elevator, however, does not move. The doors remain open for too long. The silence of the scene is almost deafening, and the tension increases with each second in which nothing happens, and everything seems out of the ordinary. Elisa leaves the elevator, looks both ways down the corridor and quickly returns, as if she were running away from something, or someone that the video does not show. Her movements are strange, as if she is talking to an invisible presence, or trapped in some kind of strange ritual. At one point, she makes gestures with her hands, as if she is touching something or someone that is not there. It is difficult to watch without feeling a shiver run down your spine. The video was released by the police in the hope of obtaining clues, but it had the opposite effect. The images went viral, and Elisa Lam's case became an internet phenomenon. Thousands of people around the world began to speculate about what could have happened. Was she being stalked by a killer? Was she suffering a psychotic episode? Or was there something supernatural going on, something completely beyond human comprehension? From that video onwards, Lisa's case became a true collective obsession. Soon after the video was released, the internet split into groups of theorists, each with a different explanation for the events. Some believed that Elisa was in the midst of an episode caused by her bipolar disorder and a possible wrong combination of medications. This would be the most rational explanation, a fragile young woman, alone in a strange city, succumbing to the weight of her own mind. But there were details that this theory simply could not account for. Others believed that Elisa had been murdered. The hypothesis that someone, perhaps a hotel employee, was stalking her gained traction, especially since the elevator seemed to be stuck, as if it had been deliberately disabled. There were rumors about people with access to the hotel's cameras and internal systems. What further fueled suspicion was the fact that the video appeared to be edited, seconds of footage were missing, and some parts seemed sped up or distorted. And, of course, there were the darker theories. Some people swore that Elisa's behavior resembled that of victims of possession. Others believed that she had been the target of a satanic ritual or that she had come into contact with an evil entity that inhabited the Cecil Hotel. The video, for these theorists, was not just strange, it was a real paranormal recording. And the more they tried to explain it, the more questions arose. 20 days after Elisa's disappearance, guests began to complain about the strange taste and color of the hotel's water. The shower pressure was weak, and some reported that the water came out dark in the first few seconds. It was then that an employee named Miguel Torres, in charge of maintenance, went up to the roof to check the hotel's water tanks. He would never forget what he found. When he opened one of the 4 large tanks, Miguel was overcome by an indescribable shock. Inside the tank, floating partially naked, was the body of Elisa Lam. She had been found in a place that was difficult to access, where theoretically no one should be able to enter without setting off alarms or being seen. The horror was not just the discovery of a corpse, it was the impossible scenario in which she found herself. The police and firefighters were called immediately. The building was evacuated, and the news spread like wildfire. Local and international media gathered in front of the Cecil Hotel, and the case took on even greater proportions. How did she end up there? Why did no one hear or see anything? And most importantly, how did a frail young woman manage to open a tank weighing hundreds of kilos, climb to the top and disappear without a trace? The official autopsy report was released weeks later, and the conclusion left many in disbelief: accidental death by drowning. According to the experts, there were no signs of physical violence, abuse, or the presence of illicit substances in her system. Toxicology tests indicated that Elisa had consumed less than the prescribed dose of her medication, suggesting a possible mental instability. But there were inconsistencies that generated even more suspicion. How could she have managed to access the roof, given that the way there was restricted by locked doors and alarms? Why did no one hear anything, and how did no one notice the tank being broken into? Even more disturbing was the fact that the tank lids were extremely heavy. According to experts, it would have been nearly impossible for Elisa to have climbed in, thrown herself in, and then closed the lid on her own. Some witnesses said that the alarms had not been triggered that night, which suggested the possibility that someone with access, perhaps an employee, was involved. Others questioned the final report, claiming that it omitted information and left too many questions unanswered. The idea that it had all been accidental seemed too simplistic for the degree of strangeness and deep mystery that had surrounded the case from the beginning. The mystery of Elisa Lam did not end with the discovery of her body. The Cecil Hotel, which had been around for a long time, had accumulated a macabre history that no one could ignore. Throughout its existence, the place had been the scene of suicides, murders, and disappearances. In the 1930s, the hotel had already been linked to several cases of people taking their own lives in its rooms, and in 1962, a woman was found dead on the street, apparently after jumping from a 10th-floor window. However, the cases of violence did not stop there. In 1985, serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, made the hotel his temporary home, taking his victims there and committing atrocities without the slightest remorse. It was during this period that the place began to be seen by many as a kind of safe haven for evil figures. Not only Ramirez, but other criminals stayed at the hotel over the decades. And the stories about the building, its walls, and the winding hallways continued to haunt those who knew it. The most disturbing thing about all of this is that, with each story of death or suffering, the Cecil Hotel seemed to feed on negativity. Many say that the building itself had an evil presence that attracted these events, as if there was an energy that attracted tragedies. When Elisa Lam entered that hotel, she didn't know it, but she was walking straight into the epicenter of a mystery that may never be fully solved. Elisa Lam's death, and everything that followed, became a widely discussed and speculated case. The case not only left an indelible mark on the Cecil Hotel, but also created a legacy of mystery and unrest that persists to this day. Even years after her death, what really happened to Elisa Lam remains unknown to the public. While the hotel has been renamed and sold, Elisa's tragedy has never been fully explained. The feeling that something supernatural may have occurred that night still looms over the case. For many, the way Elisa behaved in the elevator video, her apparent search for something or someone, and the impossibility of explaining what happened next, remain a mystery. In 2014, the hotel was finally closed and reopened under a new name, but the memories and questions still linger. What was the true role of the Cecil Hotel in all of this? In 2020, Netflix released a documentary about the case, bringing to light new theories and revealing even more about the complexity of the mystery. But will any answer truly satisfy those seeking to understand what happened to Elisa Lam? Or will the case forever remain one of the darkest and most unexplained stories in recent history? The mystery lives on, with no end in sight. Now the next story left me quite thinking about whether or not to tell it, but I'll leave it up to you to decide. The Panic House, Fukuoka Incident. In the heart of Japan, in Fukuoka, a city of peaceful landscapes and cultural contrasts, a house gained notoriety not for its beauty or history, but for the fear it caused. Known as the Panic House, it was just another ordinary residence until the fateful incident that transformed it into a cursed place. In its simplicity, this house hid deep and terrifying secrets that even today, more than a decade later, continue to haunt locals and tourists who dare to approach it. The incident in Fukuoka was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a series of inexplicable events that surrounded the house. Something had infiltrated it, an invisible evil that seemed to feed on the shadows of the night. The silence that took over the house, an empty house but full of dark stories, made those who passed by feel an uneasy sensation, as if they were being watched. Some said they heard screams in the distance, others only barely audible whispers that seemed to echo off the walls. When the first reports of what had really happened in that house began to emerge, no one could believe it. The story spread like wildfire, and soon the Panic House ceased to be just a tourist attraction, becoming a grim warning about what could be hidden in the depths of the unknown. But what had happened so horribly there? And who was behind all this mystery? The survivors, if we can call them that, were never the same again, and the city of Fukuoka was never able to free itself from this terrifying memory. What exactly happened in that house? The first clues came from local residents who began reporting a strange increase in disappearances and unusual behavior in the vicinity of the residence. A family had moved into the house, a seemingly peaceful move, but something was wrong from the beginning. Every night, strange sounds spread through the neighborhood, a continuous knocking on the walls, as if something was crawling or trying to escape. At first, these were just rumors. But they soon became undeniable. Those who entered the house were never the same again. The stories began to take shape when, after a few weeks, a series of inexplicable events culminated in a night of absolute panic. One of the family members, visibly distraught, left the house in the middle of the night, saying that something was chasing him, something that could not be seen. When the police arrived, the house was empty, but what they found inside was even more disturbing. The air was thick, and the place, frozen in time, seemed to have been left in a hurry. What was only a suspicion became a certainty. The evil that had taken up residence in that house was not something natural. It was at this point that the city of Fukuoka was invaded by a collective feeling of fear. Neighbors began to tell even stranger stories. People claimed to have seen ghostly figures in the windows, others felt a dark presence following them through deserted streets. Even the most skeptical began to question themselves. The incident gained national notoriety, but the answers, if any, remained unclear. How had a simple house become the center of so much horror? What else was lurking there, waiting to be discovered? After the incident that left Fukuoka in shock, many wondered what had happened inside the house to make it such a cursed place. No explanation seemed to satisfy the locals or the authorities. Some spoke of the presence of something supernatural, an invisible force that had invaded the place, while others suggested that the house held ancient and dark secrets, perhaps even related to rituals of worship of evil entities. But, no matter how many theories multiplied, no concrete evidence emerged to clarify what really happened there. The mystery deepened as more and more details began to be revealed. Investigators who entered the house described the feeling of oppression that took over the environment. There was something strange about the walls, as if the bricks themselves were charged with negative energy. And then, testimonies began to appear from people who claimed to have entered the house before the incident, reporting unexplained visions and experiences, shadows moving, doors slamming on their own, and, most disturbing of all, a sense of impending despair, as if the house itself were alive and hungry for souls. But most disturbing of all was the disappearance of people who had gotten too close. Some vanished without a trace, while others who managed to escape seemed to be under some kind of spell. Local doctors attested that many of the survivors were in a state of shock. Deep, unable to speak about what had happened. These accounts were recorded, but in the end, all that was left was a trail of unanswered questions and a house that continued to cast its shadow over Fukuoka. As the years passed, Fukuoka's Panic House became a legend, fueling all kinds of theories. Among the most common, some indicated that the house was built on an old cemetery, which would have given rise to the evil energy that took over the place. Others spoke of secret rituals performed by an occult society, which would have left a curse there that would never be broken. These accounts generated a cult of curious people, who began to venture into the house, eager to discover what really happened within its walls. But anyone who dared to enter never left with the same sanity with which they entered. One particularly disturbing theory suggested that the grounds of the house itself were possessed by an ancient spirit, an entity that had the ability to manipulate the minds of those who approached it. It was as if the house was calling to those with a dark destiny, to use their souls as fuel for its existence. Reports of people claiming to hear whispers or see shadows moving of their own accord began to multiply, leading many to believe that something far more dangerous was lurking. This was not just a haunted house, but something far more evil, something that fed on the fear and pain of the living. As more visitors showed up, more theories emerged. Some believed that this incident was just the tip of the iceberg and that the true story of the Scarecrow House was yet to come. However, with each attempt to unearth the house's secrets, more mysteries emerged, leaving the town in a continual state of apprehension. No one knew what was behind the door, but one thing was certain: the house did not want anyone to find out the truth. The final moments of the family who lived in the Fukuoka Panic House remain one of the greatest enigmas in Japanese horror history. As the days passed, the family members' behavior became increasingly strange. They began to isolate themselves, avoiding daylight, and to make matters worse, community members reported that they seemed to be in a trance-like state. Their expressions were blank, as if something had stolen their souls. Over time, it became clear that the house was shaping the minds of everyone who entered, creating an oppressive, inescapable atmosphere that grew deeper with each passing night. However, the real turning point came one night when neighbors heard screams coming from the house. Desperate screams, followed by absolute silence. When the police arrived, The house was in complete disarray, but the family members were gone. There were no signs of a struggle, but objects were scattered across the floor, as if an invisible force had destroyed everything around them. No bodies were found, but what disturbed investigators the most was the psychological state of one of the neighbors, who claimed to have seen a shadowy figure leaving the house on the night of the disappearances. This account, with no rational explanation, further fueled the legend of the Panic House. The case was officially closed, but rumors about what really happened in that house never stopped growing. The police, lacking any concrete leads, were forced to close the investigation, but the feeling that something macabre had happened in that house never disappeared. For those who lived nearby, the terror did not end with the disappearance of the family. On the contrary, it permanently settled in the collective memory of the city, leaving a dark void in the heart of Fukuoka. After the incident, the house, which had previously been just an ordinary home, became a symbol of horror and the unknown. Many tried to move into the place, trying to disprove the legend or seek answers, but none of them stayed for long. Some left, never to speak of what they had witnessed again. Others, as if under some kind of spell, simply fell apart emotionally. The house seemed to exert an irresistible force over its residents and onlookers, driving them mad or even disappearing. Fukuoka's Panic House became an icon of an invisible evil, a place where terror was so thick it could be felt in the air. Time has not been able to erase the stories about the place. People began to report sightings of strange figures at night, near the house. Some say that the spirit of the family that lived there still roams the hallways, screaming for help, or even trying to lure others into the same tragedy. The legend grew, taking on even greater proportions, fueled by stories from former residents who swear they saw lights flashing on the second floor. Even after the house was abandoned. And so it was that the Scarecrow House became not just a place of fear, but a true relic of terror in Japan, whose cursed aura remains to this day. Over the years, many tourists and ghost hunters began to visit Fukuoka, attracted by the sinister history. But most of them, when approaching the house, felt an unbearable sense of unease, as if something were watching them. Some say that the true evil of the house is not something that can be seen or touched, it is something that slowly infiltrates, consuming the minds of those who dare to get close. The truth behind the Scarecrow House may never be known, but one thing is certain, the terror it represents has never disappeared. With the growing interest in the Scarecrow House, a famous ghost hunter decided to face what many considered a cursed place. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment and unwavering courage, he entered the house alone, determined to find out what was behind so many terrifying tales. At first, he seemed confident, laughing off the stories and claiming that nothing could scare him. But as he made his way through the dark, shadowy rooms, something began to change. He described a growing sense of dread, as if he were being watched by an unseen presence, and a heavy energy that seemed to slow his steps with every movement. The tension grew when, while exploring the second floor, the ghost hunter found one of the missing family's diaries. In it, he read disturbing accounts of unsettling dreams, visions of shadows, and feelings that something was approaching. But what really made him tremble was the last entry, which read, "Do not enter the attic. Whatever is up there is waiting." When he recounted this discovery in his video, the look of fear on his face was palpable, and many who watched the recording said he was visibly shaken. In the end, he decided to leave, but the panic in his eyes was unmistakable. The house had won, and no one could defy the curse that enveloped it. But most mysterious of all, after his departure, the ghost hunter was never seen again. He deleted all his social media accounts and withdrew from the public, stating that he could no longer bear the weight of what he saw. His last words, spoken to a close friend before he disappeared, were simple but terrifying. "I went up to the attic, and what I saw up there was not of this world." Today, Fukuoka's Panic House remains empty, but the mystery surrounding it continues to attract those who wish to uncover its secrets. The place has been surrounded by fences and guarded by cameras, but still, a few brave souls dare to approach, seeking an answer or, perhaps, wanting to face their own fears. However, for many, the house represents more than just a macabre place. It is a dark reminder that there are forces beyond our comprehension. Something lingers there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself once more. But will the house remain silent forever? Some believe that as the years pass, the evil energy that inhabits it will weaken, allowing the place to finally be forgotten. Others, however, fear that the true terror is yet to come. Some claim that the house will not rest until the required number of souls is completed, as if it has an insatiable appetite for more victims. What we know for sure is that as long as there are those willing to face its horrors, that the scared house will continue to exist as a symbol of eternal terror, a place where the lines between the real and the supernatural are blurred. In the meantime, the residents of Fukuoka go about their lives, always keeping an eye on the cursed house and the whispers of its stories haunting the city. But somewhere, a question continues to linger: will the truth ever be revealed, or will the panic house keep its secrets forever, swallowing up those who dare to approach it?